My name is Professor Stephen T. Katz from Boston University, and I'm happy to be involved with the Two Museums project that has been devised to bring students of Jewish tradition and Black youngsters together to use the two great museums of Washington, the Holocaust Museum and the New World Slavery Museum, to teach each other about the history of our different peoples and to try to encourage better understanding and camaraderie, friendship between the two communities. In doing so, I just want to make a few methodological comments here at the beginning of the project so that everyone who watches this will understand what they can and cannot, should and should not do when thinking about this issue of comparative history. The first thing is obvious. Both of them are comparable in the sense that they involve enormous dehumanization, violation in every way sexually, economic exploitation, physical abuse, and a large number of dead. This is what makes the comparison so readily makeable and why so many people turn to it in different kinds of contexts. However, before going further, I would point out one has to be very careful about using this to make judgments about suffering. There is no way to compare suffering A and suffering B. Suffering is not quantifiable, and therefore I would encourage everyone most strongly to avoid talking about this one suffered more than that one. This group suffered more than that group. And here I include a lot of other victims of mass death as well. Rwanda, Native Americans in the New World, all kinds of crimes that have been committed in China, the Gulag, Armenia during World War I. All of these phenomena should not be discussed in terms of suffering in a comparative way. Second thing I would say is there is no hierarchy of suffering, of evil. People like to put A atop of B atop of C as more terrible than X or Y or Z. But the fact is, there's no way to create that hierarchy that is intellectually sound. The evidence doesn't support the kind of conclusion one is trying to draw by saying the Holocaust is worse than slavery, or slavery is worse than the Holocaust, or whatever else might be at issue. The third thing that I would encourage very strongly, absolutely necessary, is to understand what the Holocaust and New World Slavery are so that comparisons that are made are sensible. And here it needs to be said without any kind of evasion that New World Slavery is essentially an economic phenomenon. The whole purpose of slavery is to meet the need for labor. The Native Americans died off very quickly in the New World because of the diseases that were brought here by Europeans to which they had no immunity. And therefore, in order to make the riches of America really come forth and be exploitable, you needed labor. It was in this context that people, Europeans, turned to Africa, which had historically in the Middle Ages already been exploited for slave labor, and began the terrible international slave trade with the New World. Altogether, about 12.5 million African men, women, and children were brought to the United States. They were not brought here because people felt X or Y about them. They were good, they were bad, they were evil, they were lazy, but rather because they felt that they could be exploited for their labor. There was an economic incentive, profit, greed. And all the decisions that are important with regard to black slavery are economic decisions. All the decisions about the terrible Middle Passage, the crossing of the Atlantic Ocean in ships, were economic. All the terrible judgments about how to employ these slaves once they came to the New World was economic. All the sexual exploitation had a financial element, namely breeding new babies, was a profit. Alternatively, the Holocaust is not about economics. It's not about profit, though there were economic consequences, and there was enormous theft, and there was the taking of all Jewish property across Europe. But that was a secondary consequence of the key issue. And the key issue was a metaphysical idea that race defined what a person in a group was, that it was immutable, unchangeable, and it varied in its character from one group to the other. According to this principle of race, the Jews were racially inferior, what the Germans called Untermenschen. And in this category, because they were subhuman, they did all kinds of terrible things. The most important thing is that because they're inferior, their inferiority leads them to be parasites because they can't create things themselves. They live off the labor of others, they live off the ideas of others, and as Untermenschen, as subhumans, they do all kinds of terrible things to their neighbors to get on top. The key here is to understand that race has many meanings. The idea of race in black slavery is a rather simple one, largely connected with color. In the Holocaust, race is connected with ideas of history, with the ideas of all values. What your race is defines what you will do intellectually, artistically, aesthetically, politically. That is to say, in the Holocaust, race is about values. Race is about not only the color of a person and their individual quality, but the rise and fall of nations, the character of a group's political activity, if loyal or disloyal to the state, the nature of their sexual behavior, whether they're promiscuous, lascivious, lustful, criminal, or they're not. So that race means something very different in the Holocaust than it does in the context of black slavery. Now, it's with these two understandings in mind. One is a system for profit, and one is a system to reconstruct history, to eliminate the Jews altogether from the human family. What is called to make the world Judenrein, free of Jews, are the defining differences that need to be respected in all further conversation about the Holocaust and the slave project of the New World. And it's these two very different but very, very world historically important issues that the two museum programs is going to try to enter into, interrogate, and cast light on for our young people. Thank you.